You're listening to Sensitive Changemakers. This podcast is created for highly sensitive leaders and is designed to support you to embrace your strengths and gifts so you can feel more confident in your own mind and body and live a life with intention, purpose, and more importantly, joy. I'm your host, Kate Carter, a fellow HSP who has a BA Honours degree in education, is a fully trained and qualified professional coach and NLP practitioner, and has over 17 years of teaching and over 3 years of coaching experience supporting highly sensitive people. I believe that you can do anything you want to in this life, but that sometimes the path forward becomes muddy with self-doubt and fear of failure. It's my mission to help sensitive thought leaders peel away the self-doubt and stories holding them back, for them to see their own beauty and strength so they can increase self-confidence and self-trust through thought and embodiment work and see their path clearly and move forward confidently, living their life with intention and purpose. I would love for you to come and join us. Hello and welcome to Sensitive Changemakers. As always, I hope whenever you're listening to this, you are well and that you're having a wonderful week. I am absolutely loving the light. And what I mean by this is it is now lighter in the evenings, it's lighter in the mornings. I just love that there's more sunshine coming in. I didn't realise how much I'd actually missed it over the winter period, so I'm loving that at the moment. I went on an extra long walk this morning after I took my daughter to school, just really kind of appreciated the spring. So that's where I'm at. This week's episode is actually a live recording from our free masterclass that was in the Facebook group Sensitive Changemakers, and I've brought it here because I think it's a really important conversation to be having, especially surrounding anxiety, and if you're highly sensitive as well, it adds that extra layer to it. So I would love to hear your feedback on this. Any questions you have, any queries, please do reach out and ask away. And after you've listened to this, if you think actually this is something I do need support with, this is something that I think I could benefit from Kate's help, then please do reach out and ask. I would love to support you through this. So here it is. Enjoy, and I will see you guys soon. Hello, happy Monday. I hope you are well. Welcome to our masterclass for this week. We are talking about why you still feel anxious, and we're going to go over lots of different ideas here, and I'm hoping that it all makes sense. If anything needs further clarification, please do let me know. So I'm going to first off by starting to talk about anxiety generally and the specific type of anxiety that I'm talking about today. So first of all, anxiety is a completely natural response to threats or perceived threats. Everybody has anxiety, everybody has worries. So everybody has them, but the difference is you have the normal response anxiety and then sort of an excessive cyclical anxiety. And I just want to talk about the difference. So normal anxiety, which everybody gets, is, for example, if you were walking up to cross a road and you went to walk across the road and a car was coming and you suddenly saw the car, you would jump straight back, your heart would be beating, you'd be kind of sweaty palms, you'd feel a bit sick, you might even feel a bit dizzy. That is the normal kind of response that we have to things like that. And then once that threat has passed, so the car has gone past, your body returns to homeostasis. So homeostasis, it returns back to balance. You go back down to your baseline. But you've got the other type of anxiety, and that's the anxiety that I want to talk about today. This is when it is consistent, so it's normal in your everyday life. This feeling, this hum of anxiety, it's normal in your everyday life. It's excessive and it's persistent. And that's the anxiety that I want to talk about today. And the first thing I want to talk about is actually what is happening on a very physiological and neurological basis. What is happening in your mind and your body? So you've got the amygdala. So the amygdala is there and it's looking for threats and it's working out
what is a threat, what isn't a threat. And what it happens here is it then sends like a trigger throughout your body to get into fight or flight. And so the amazing thing about your brain and body, and also not so helpful thing about your brain, is that it doesn't understand the difference between real and imaginary, and now and the future. And so you could be worrying about something like the what if scenarios. You could be worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, but your body would assume it is happening now. So the amygdala would send out that sort of response to the rest of your body, and your body would respond as though it was happening now. And what happens is your energy gets distributed apart. So normally when you're at baseline, it's distributed evenly. When you are in that heightened anxiety, it gets distributed to your heart, your lungs, and your muscles, your extremities, your hands and your feet, because it's basically getting you ready to fight something or to run away from something. So it's got all of that energy ready for you to go. This is why people who have panic attacks and anxiety tend to have different physical symptoms. So they may feel really dizzy, they may feel like their hands are sweaty, or that they've got the shakes, or they feel sick, or they can feel their heart beating out their chest. All of these things are because your body is going through that response. It's going through that fight or flight response. And normal, like I said, if we imagine that a normal person, I'm saying normal here because nobody's really normal, but if we say that the sort of an average Joe, their baseline is really quite low, and then when they have an anxiety or any kind of extreme anxiety response, it goes up, and then the threat passes and it comes back down to that low baseline. With somebody who has persistent anxiety and it's there every day, what happens is our baseline is just higher. So we are constantly in an arousal state of looking around, of perceiving threats everywhere. We never fully relax. We never go to that balance, to that homeostasis. And so we are here all the time. It's like a background hum. And you may not even know that it's there. I've heard it described as though when you hear silence after you've switched the fridge off, like the fridge hum, you've normalized, and then it switches off and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that was so noisy. And it's the same with that persistent anxiety. It's like a hum in your life, and you're not always aware of it because you've normalized it so much, but your baseline is higher. So you're constantly there, and then you have these spikes, just like the rest of us, those spikes of high anxiety, but you never fully come down. You always kind of stay here. And so when you're doing this for a consistent amount of time, it's called living in survival mode, because you're never returning to baseline, that lower baseline. And when this happens, our energy that is in those heightened anxiety, when it's getting distributed to our muscles and our heart and our lungs, it kind of stays there, which is why people who have persistent or excessive anxiety, they may have digestive issues, they might have IBS, or they may have their period stop, or they may find that they're always getting a cold, or they're always getting poorly, because all of that energy that is needed for the reproductive system, for the digestive system, for the immune system isn't doing its job there. It's being distributed to heart and lungs and extremities and muscles. So I hope that makes sense. Let me see what else I've got here. It can also affect your cognitive function. So you might have like brain fog, or trouble focusing, or trouble remembering things, again, because this is an extremity, and so it's not putting the energy towards thinking and being cognitive and thinking things through. The other thing I think is really important, and I'm going to go into this one in more detail because it's what I find all the time. It's what I found with myself, it's what I find with clients as well. When we are in that heightened anxiety, so it's, for some of us, it might be like the start of a panic attack or an anxiety attack. For some of us, it's just that excessive anxiety. Something's triggered that flight or flight response, that fight or flight response. And what happens is the prefrontal cortex, so the newer part of our brain, the one that is responsible for logical thinking, for problem solving, for being creative, that part of us switches off It just goes to sleep in the nicest possible way. And the emotional, the limbic and that reptile part of our brain is completely in control. And so logic goes out the window, everything becomes survival. And it doesn't matter how silly, stupid, and I'm using these words because these are words that I've heard my clients use. It doesn't matter how silly or stupid you think your anxiety is when you are in a more logical place. It doesn't matter when you're in that heightened anxiety, because logic has said goodbye. Logic has switched itself off. And so one of the things I find really important to kind of talk with clients through is, let's change the way you're talking to yourself. Because if you are constantly blaming yourself, if you're constantly having a go at yourself, and I've been here so I understand it, then you are adding to what is already quite an exhausting and traumatic situation. You know, your body is going through something that should only happen every so often, and it's going through it a lot of times. And if anybody has had excessive anxiety, you know how exhausting it is. And then you're adding to that exhaustion by beating yourself up. And I get it, I really do. But what I really encourage you and invite you to do here is to look at things with curiosity rather than blame. So instead of, I'm so stupid, why can't I think this through? Why can't I just think differently? Instead, let's talk about, I wonder why today was really hard. I wonder what was going on that actually influenced my day today. So we're just shifting it. We're not going like super positive, because even though I love positive psychology, I think it doesn't always have a place right now where we are in this sort of cycle of anxiety. What we need to do is just make little shifts. And so just shifting it from blaming ourselves to getting curious about it can really help us in the long term. And the other thing that I just want to pick up here is, a lot of people come to me because they want just one thing. They just want one thing to make the anxiety go away. I just want it to go away. And actually, one of the reasons that you may still feel anxious consistently is because you're looking for that one thing. And actually, in my experience, both with my own journey and those of my clients, it is all about the little things. It's those little shifts that compound with other things that actually have the biggest impact on how you're feeling. And so it's the little thing of shifting your inner narrative, like I just said, and instead of blaming, looking at things with curiosity. That's a little shift. And it's not easy, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's a little shift. And together with some other things, some little shifts as well, that's when you have those big results. That's when you suddenly realise, oh, I haven't felt anxious today. And that is sometimes how it happens. It's not like a big aha moment of, oh my God, I'm anxiety free, I feel amazing, I just did the one thing and it was amazing. It's more incremental. It happens, I find, over a longer time. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be ridiculously long. I'm not talking about years here, but it happens slowly, and you're suddenly aware that, oh, I can think a bit more clearly, and I can relax, and I don't feel anxious all the time, or I don't feel as anxious as I did consistently. And it's just little shifts, and they get better and better and better. So one of the reasons that a lot of people are still feeling anxious is because they're looking for one big thing. And it's not one big thing. It's lots of little things that compound over time that make you feel better, that you have more awareness and tools that you can start to then put into place to have that relief, to have that, oh, I'm not anxious today. So those are just a few things that come up for me as I'm going through this. And traditionally, the way that people deal with anxiety is they look at therapy. So things like CBT, which I do have a qualification, and I do bring it into certain sessions where it's needed. So CBT is a good way, and that is, it helps individuals to identify and challenge negative thought patterns. Now, the reason I say I don't use it all the time is because some people aren't ready to swap straight away from negative to positive. They're not ready to kind of look at things and flip things straight away. They need some more steps in between. So if you've used something like CBT and you're still feeling anxious, it may be because you need some smaller steps before you start looking at flipping the script and changing the story and things like that. There's also medication. A lot of people use medication, and if it's needed, it's needed. That's okay. Again, we're removing the blame. We're looking at things with curiosity and with a bit of compassion. There is things like relaxation techniques. There is lifestyle changes. So lifestyle changes is one of the ones I think some people try and some people don't. So again, if you're still feeling anxious and you haven't had a look at lifestyle changes, then again, this is a great place to kind of delve into. And it might be that you are really not okay with caffeine. Like you get really hyperarousal with caffeine, and so it'd be a really good idea to swap to decaf. Or, and this goes doubly for highly sensitive people, I feel, that if you are highly sensitive, you already have quite a sensitive nervous system, and you will react more to things like caffeine and alcohol more so than other people anyway. And if you're anxious on top of that, then you're adding a kind of different layer, another layer onto it. So it's a really good idea to look at little swaps that you can make. Again, not big changes, but just little swaps. Swapping from caffeine to decaf, reducing alcohol, swapping from normal chocolate to dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is, really good for mood stability and things like that. Making sure that you're eating a well-balanced diet. I know when I was at the height of my anxiety, too much sugar was never a good thing with me, but I also needed like really good complex carbs. They always used to I always felt more kind of just nourished after I ate them, and it really helped me. And I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody, but just to give you some ideas about how actually what we're consuming in terms of food and drink can really have an impact on how we're feeling as well. So there's lots of different traditional ways that you can look at managing anxiety. And I've spoken to a few there where you can see that if you haven't implemented one of those or tried one of those, it might be a good idea to have a look at them if that suits you. And this brings me to my next point, which is everybody is different. So I was talking earlier about the little things and the little things compounding over time to make those big shifts for you so you start to feel better. But what those little things are going to be different for every single person. But there is a running theme underneath all of them. And so I just want to talk through that running theme so you can see, I do that, but I don't do that. So maybe I should implement that. I'm hoping that makes sense. So the first thing we've already spoken about, it is how you talk to yourself, that inner dialogue. That's really important, trying to shift from that blame mentality to more of a curious one. And the reason that will help so much is because if you're living in that blame, you will hate yourself so much that you won't want to try new things. And if you do try new things, all you'll do is blame yourself when they're not working, and then you won't stick them out. So if you actually shift that into more of a curious look, it helps you to stay in it and try those little things and kind of just tweak them as needed. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, as I've said, is looking at lifestyle and just making some tweaks if you can. And I think the next one that I really kind of want to talk to is, and this is going to sound quite counterintuitive, but bear with me, is this mind-body connection. Okay, so what I find is that people with anxiety give themselves a double whammy. And what I mean by this is, not only are you having a fight-flight response to a trigger, so your trigger is very individual to you. It is normally based on experiences, situations that you had as a child or during your developmental years. And these have got cemented over time. So they almost feel like they become part of you. And I'll talk about identity in a minute. So they almost become part of you. And what happens is your brain is trying to be really helpful, even though it's really unhelpful. It's trying to say, right, when this trigger happens, Kate behaves like this. Let's make that a shortcut so she doesn't even have to think about it. That trigger is there, and she has that response instantaneously. And that's kind of how things work. So you've got that fight, flight, freeze response, but it's instantaneous. Like you have the trigger and then you've got that bodily reaction of sweating, palms, heart racing, feeling dizzy, feeling sick, and it's instantaneous. And so what I find is you're battling that first of all, which is, like I said, incredibly exhausting and traumatic in its own right. Then what I find is because your body is having these responses, it's a very physical feeling. Over time, the more and more you have these bodily sort of reactions, you start to fear your body. And so that's what I mean by the double whammy. Not only are you dealing with these anxiety attacks, these kind of heightened excessive anxiety peaks where you're having this fight, flight or freeze response, but you're also then, over time, the more and more you're feeling like this, you're actually starting to get scared and fear your body. And so what happens is you start to get really scared of it. So if you do feel dizzy, or if you do feel, I don't know, out of breath, which is something you experience when you're in that heightened anxiety, but say you experience dizziness just on a random day, sometimes that in itself can then trigger an anxiety response because you're there going, oh my God, my body's feeling like this. And then you go into that, this isn't right, this isn't normal, something's wrong mentality. I hope that makes sense. So you've got like a double whammy, and it's making it like doubly exhausting. It's making it doubly difficult. And so one of the things that I think gets missed with a lot of support around anxiety is this mind-body connection, because it's all one piece. We like to separate the two, but they do work as a complete and utter whole being. And so one of the things, and this was definitely true for me, and I know it's really true for a lot of my clients, is we try to logic it out. So we kind of just get scared of anything like neck down, anything that's body related, and we try and logic it out all the time. And when we can't logic it out, because like I said, the heightened anxiety is not logical, we get frustrated with ourselves, we beat ourselves up, and then that becomes a cycle. So that's why I was saying we need to stop the blame to start off with, and then we need to start to actually allow ourselves, we need to reopen that connection between the mind and body. Now, for some of us, we have numbed the body-mind connection so much that it's really difficult to sit with our body, to sit with those bodily feelings, because we've numbed it, because that's how we've learned to cope. Just numb it, just push it away, just to suppress it. And so the first thing we actually need to do is get used to feeling stuff in our body again in a safe space. And so when I'm working with clients, I always do a safe anchor to start off with. I always go into a safe memory, something that they can bring up into the session if needs be, if things do feel a little bit overwhelming, or if we hit on things that they're like, oh, that's quite a lot to do, we can always use that as a safety anchor. And I think that's a really important part of this. But I've used the analogy of the ice cube before, and I'm going to talk about it here because I think it's really important to highlight what I mean. So the first thing is mind body connection. It doesn't mean that you're not tapping into your thoughts or your awareness around your thoughts. All of those are wonderful things. What this is about just sitting with different emotions as they come up. And if you imagine an ice cube, if somebody told you to hold an ice cube, to start off with, you're like, okay. And then as time goes on, you're like, oh, this stings, because holding ice stings. I don't know if you've ever done it before. It's not a pleasant experience. And you were like, oh, this stings. I want to throw it away. And that would be your kind of instinctual response would be, I just want to throw it away. I just want to get rid of it. Go away, go away. But if you sit there with the ice cube will melt. Yes, you'll have water everywhere, which isn't pleasant. But the pain will go, and you'll sit there and you think, I'm okay. I'm still okay. And so in a safe environment, a safe space, being allowed to feel those emotions is part of it. And because emotions are not logical, they're not language based, okay, they are feelings. And so what I love about it is when you're using this, often you start to feel better, but it's not necessarily something you can verbalize or vocalize. You just start to feel a little bit better. Things feel a little bit easier to sit with, and you start to increase that resilience in different emotions. And so one of the things I think is so important is to start to open that mind-body connection. And I feel the more and more clients that I talk to, even when I introduce this aspect to start off with, it's still very thought heavy. And it's something that obviously, because I work with the client where they're at, so we end up starting with the thoughts, and then we kind of drift a little bit down, and we go down and we go down until we start to feel into those emotions and start to feel how they feel in their body. How can we sit with them? How does that feel? And then we kind of go back up into the thought patterns and vocalizing what that means. But I think that's such a huge part of it, and I don't think a lot of people talk about it, and it's why for so many people that they still feel so anxious, because they're trying to logic it out. They're trying to just talk it through all the time, and anxiety is not logical. And so we need to be able to sit and experience and accept these bodily feelings and emotions. So I think that's really important there. The last part that I just want to go over is identity, which is something I was talking about earlier. So when you have a heightened anxiety, like I said, it's normally been something that has been cemented over time through events, situations, childhood experience, etc. And it's cemented so much it's become your identity. And so we say things like, I'm an anxious person. And one of the things I really love to do with clients is start to separate that, so that you don't see yourself as an anxious person. You start to say, I have anxiety, instead of I am anxious. So you start to just, again, it's a very small shift. You just start to make that small shift away from the anxiety. So you see that you aren't the anxiety. You are the person who is having anxious thoughts. And that's a big shift. Another thing that people can do is actually name their anxiety. Mine was always called Doris, because then again it separates it. You can see it for what it is. This is just a thought pattern I'm having. It's not a truth. It's not who I really am. It's just something I'm feeling at the moment. And then you can start to see things as temporary. You can start to see things as not you. I hope that makes sense. Deeper than that, so on the surface level, all of those things are wonderful to do. But on a deeper level, what I find is that we don't want the anxiety. We don't want the heightened anxiety. We don't want to feel like that. We hate it when our body feels, all of those different physical feelings and symptoms and things like that. We don't want to feel like that. But at the same time, a lot of us struggle to want to let that part of us go. Because if we're not that person that reacts like that, then who are we? And then there feels like there's a huge gap in our identity. And that sometimes for a lot of people is scarier than putting up with the anxiety. And I'm not saying that this is on a conscious level. I don't think we choose this consciously. I think it's on a subconscious level, because again, it's too scary. It's too scary to create or to put new habits in or to shift our identity into something else. It's easier to just put up with the anxiety. And again, subconsciously, not consciously. I don't believe anybody chooses to have anxiety. It is on a subconscious level. And as I'm talking through this, I'm thinking of James Clear and his book Atomic Habits. And I know I've spoken about this before, but I think it is really useful to hear here, is he talks about the power of identity when you're making change, when you want to shift something, when you want to create change. And he talks about two people who are both trying to quit smoking. And he says they both get offered a cigarette, and the one person says, no, I'm trying to quit. And the second person says, no, I'm not a smoker. And it's the bravery, and it is brave and it is courageous to actually shift your identity into something else. And you get to choose that. That's the amazing thing. You get to choose who you want to be and your identity, because it's no different to the identity that you currently think you have. Because your current identity, if there's a huge amount of anxiety and trauma, your actual identity is probably based on a load of untruths, a load of stories, a load of things that aren't actually factual at all. They're just experiences and habits that have happened over long periods of time that have created that identity. And even though that can feel quite scary, the beauty of that is you get to choose again. And you can bring the subconscious to the conscious, and you can start to shift your identity. So how do you want to feel? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to stand? How do you want to do, whatever you want to do in life? How do you want to be remembered? What do you want to be? What do you want to stand for? You actually do get, a choice. And so most of us, when we're in this situation, we generally choose things when we look at and this is why I love looking at strengths and values, because if we look at those, that helps us then to think about the type of person we are really underneath all that anxiety. If we peel back those experiences and those situations where we built up this identity of anxiety, if we peel those back, who's left underneath? Because there is somebody underneath that, and they may be really confident. They may be really a bit of a go-getter. They may be somebody who likes to take a few risks. But we've not allowed that person to the front before because the anxiety has been kind of covering it over, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I find that is the most difficult out of everything that we've spoken about today, but is the most important, is actually being ready to let the anxiety go. And I know that sounds so simple because everybody would be saying, well, of course I want to let the anxiety go. I want to say goodbye to it. But I'm hoping that you understand how difficult that can actually be to somebody who it's been such a huge part of their life, and you're asking them to let that person go, or that part of that person go. And it is almost like a grievance. There is a grief there. But the beauty, if you flip that, the beauty of that is you do get to create, you do get to choose again, to think about how you want to be. And it is, again, it's a slow process. It's not something, and I'm thinking of the clients that I've got at the moment, and myself included, it's not a quick change around. It's not like one day you identified as an anxious person and the next day you had identified as a super confident person. It doesn't work like that. And it's not like you change who you are. What you do is you actually become the person that you always were. And so if you're struggling with this last concept, think about it. If that helps, think about it in a term like that. I am actually, if I start to allow that part of me to go, it means that I get to be the person I always was underneath it. So I hope that really helps, but I find that is the most difficult. And we often self-sabotage when we're doing supportive work around anxiety because we are so scared of losing that part of that identity part of us. And it takes, like I said, I think it is really brave, and I think it's really courageous for somebody to start to let that go. So I'm hoping all of that makes sense. So just to recap, anxiety is not logical. So trying to logic it out and think it through is only going to take you so far, because your body is still very much going through that response that we were talking about before, that fight flight. It's a very bodily response. It's a very emotion-based response. And so if you want to shift anxiety, we have to bring the body and the emotions into it. That's really, really important. We talked about your inner dialogue and how shifting from a blaming culture into more of a curious culture can really support us in lots of different ways. We talked about the identity piece and actually being ready to let that part of us go and discover who we really are, and to remember who we really are. So there's lots of things there. Oh, and the last thing was about the lifestyle as well, and just making some tweaks. If you do find yourself currently, I don't know, having a lot of processed food, or having a lot of sugar, having a lot of caffeine or alcohol, those things especially are found to not be incredibly supportive if you are highly anxious as well. But there are lots of swaps that you can make that won't change like what you're doing on a daily basis, but will really help your mood. And the last one, before I forget, that I found the biggest shift in with me was vitamin D. Making sure you get either enough sunshine or that you look at a vitamin D supplement. So again, not a health consult here, but just maybe talk to a doctor if that's something that you're not doing currently, because vitamin D can really help with mood as well. Okay, so that's where I am. If you've got any questions at all, please do ask them. Again, if you need any clarification on anything, please do ask. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, actually, I really could do with some of that support and understanding where I'm at and where I want to be and what I need to work on, what my little shifts are that I need to use or to introduce to help me to feel better, please do reach out. Sessions are £50. And we do packages, so if you have packages it works out slightly less. So please do get in touch, and I will be back next week with another class. I'm sending you all so much love. Okay, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you have any takeaways or any questions, please do reach out to me either through Instagram, LinkedIn or Facebook at Kate Carter Coaching, or you can email me at kate@katecarter.co.uk. I would always love to hear your feedback and the things that you have taken from the podcast. If you know of any other highly sensitive people, then please do share this so that I can reach more and support more highly sensitive people to embrace their strengths and gifts. As a thank you, I will pick a winner every month for a free 50-minute coaching session with me. Thank you so much.